In an ever-connected world, scientists are increasingly working together to solve the biggest issues facing societies today.
There's huge potential here.
From health to energy and sustainability.
You're talking massive climate impacts.
This week on 10 Things to Know About, we're exploring how age and gender can affect how we play sports.
Bit of a trip to the physio after that, I'd say.
Women's sport has been fairly and squarely thrust into the spotlight in recent years, with athletes like Katie Taylor and Rachael Blackmore making history. Despite this, there is still so much research to be done to help female athletes realise their full potential. Sports science has historically focused on male participants. Sadly, females still account for just over a third of participants in sports science research. The lack of female-driven data impacts the environments in which women and girls play sport. The SHE research group is hoping to close that gender data gap. Co-founded by Dr. Aoife Lane, it focuses on research into sports performance, health and exercise in women and girls. How physiologically different are men and women when it comes to performance?
I think up to maybe age 11 or 12, you often see boys and girls participating together. It's quite healthy, and girls mature a little bit earlier, and they do go through a lot of changes, which includes developing breasts, obviously starting menstruation. And each of these things have an impact. If you think about it, breasts impact your enjoyment and experience of physical activity. Periods impact the same thing in terms of just the symptoms that you might experience. Then you might move through pregnancy and subsequently to menopause.
How does the environment impact on how women progress through sports and physical activity in their lives?
OK, maybe in Gaelic Games we've decent access, but the top 5 sports for girls include swimming and dancing. We don't actually have a dancing federation for sport. Swimming, we probably have less than 200 swimming clubs in Ireland. Equally with soccer and rugby, there wouldn't be as many opportunities as for boys. Girls have lower physical literacy than boys. So even before we start, we're at a disadvantage. You move that right through then into when you're actually training, competing, and even subsequently being treated for injury. These things keep happening around the different experience of boys and girls.
And what do you mean by physical literacy? You're just not able to do the jumping, running basics?
Jumping, kicking, throwing, agility, balance, coordination. Girls will always score lower on that. And those things are your skills that you must develop to be able to progress in your sport-specific skills.
David Nolan has been investigating training methods for female athletes in field and strength-based sports, like rugby and powerlifting. Do males and female athletes need to train differently?
When you look at it from a theoretical perspective, males and females are very different physiologically, but I don't think that translates to a big need or a big difference in the needs of how they have to train, because they play the same sport, so the principles of training are the same for males and females. I think what we need to get is more females just resistance training in general. If you're stronger, you're able to jump higher, run faster, slow down quicker, but you're also more resilient and less likely to injure yourself.
David is also exploring whether the menstrual cycle or hormonal contraception affects performance.
When we survey and speak to women, and intuitively they tell us, I have a lot of symptoms due to my menstrual cycle and it does affect my performance. To date, we've no strong evidence to show that the menstrual cycle phase does have an effect. Now, that is not to say the menstrual cycle doesn't have an effect on performance. I think what we need to stress is we need more high-quality research. When we bring a group of athletes into the lab and we're testing them, we're trying to find a difference on a group level. What we do know, it's highly individual between people, but also cycle to cycle.
David will be carrying out strength, speed and power tests on female and male athletes over a 10-week period. By tracking athletes across 2 menstrual cycle phases, he hopes to learn whether the menstrual cycle impacts performance.
Relax.
Well done.
So we're looking at a measure of her strength, so we can see this line, the most amount of force or peak force that she produced. But we're also interested in how quickly she can get from here to up here, and that's her rate of force development. And in sport, rate of force development is probably more important because we want to not only be strong, but express it very quickly in jumps and sprints and so on.
Need any advice? I've never lifted anything in my life.
Lift with your legs, not your back.
Okay. I'll need lots of verbal encouragement.
Okay, and in 3, 2, 1, go. Pull, 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 pull. Relax.
I'm gonna have to have a trip to the physio after that, I'd say.
What did I do?
1286. With that same line, Niamh was doing a little over 2200.
Almost twice as strong as me. Wow.
Almost. But again, we don't compare ourselves to the elite athletes.
Yeah, and it's never too late to start. So I'll be back. As a 4-time national champion in discus, strength and conditioning is key to Niamh Fogarty's success. What do you see as differences between the male and the female experience in terms of training and the environment?
We're actually working with an Olympic coach based in Sweden. He also has other male athletes, and my coach is using that information. So sometimes I do question, you know, these guys are 6'7", they're Vikings, I'm not. You know, is this meant for me?
Do you think menstruation and how it affects female athletes' performance is recognised?
I don't think there's a huge awareness, although I think it is improving. I find that if I do too much lifting in the gym in terms of volume and not enough recovery over a period of time, my period could be delayed, or even after the 8 weeks, it mightn't have come at all. So that's kind of key for me to go to my coach and say, look, I think we have to pull back a little bit now. I think in order to kind of improve communication, we need to maybe educate not just our athletes, but our coaches, both male and female.
Fundamentally, what we want to do is improve our understanding of some of the nuances and unique demands of the female athlete, so we can improve how we support them both at the elite level, but then also at the developmental and grassroots level.
Puberty, that awkward time in our lives where we experience random growth spurts and feel all gangly and odd. But these changes in our bodies affect our centre of gravity, which might explain why some teenagers become a little more clumsy. And that's fine ordinarily, but when they take part in sport, it increases their risk of getting an injury.
Dr. Sinead Holden is investigating why adolescents are at risk of getting an injury when playing sport.
Kids are going to go through a period where they're going to have a rapid period of growth of the long levers of their body. But in sports, that relates to kind of their postural stability, their ability to actually, you know, control their body while they're executing sports movements. And there is some research indicating that that can actually increase the risk of injury.
What sort of sports injuries do teenagers typically get?
There's two main types of injuries that we see. So what we would call traumatic injuries, so something like spraining an ankle or an ACL injury, a muscle strain. But what's the kind of unseen undercurrent that often happens is what we call overuse injuries. These niggles and complaints that build up slowly over time. They're harder to pinpoint, but also what happens is kids often keep training while they have them.
I'm one of those parents who ferries his kids around from one game to the other. Is there a fine line between wanting your kids to be involved in sports and trying to manage their health and safety as they grow?
Kids can be participating in multiple sports. What that can mean for the coaches, for example, is that they often don't have a good overview of how much they're actually doing. The other consideration, though, is that participating in more than one type of sport is actually good for developing better motor performance, and that's actually a beneficial trait.
Sinead is collaborating with colleagues in Northern Ireland to develop an all-island overview of injury in adolescent team sports.
And we're going to look across a range of different team sports at a range of different levels, so not just the elite athletes, but anyone who's participating in sport. And we're going to recruit 800 adolescents between 3rd and 6th year, because what we see is that's kind of where you have this peak in injury incidence.
Sinead will use participant characteristics such as age, weight and height to predict their stage of growth.
Remember, it's reach out slowly.
Her colleague, Brian Caulfield, will then conduct a QY balance test to assess their balance and their control of balance. Brian has offered me the chance to see what's involved. My role as guinea pig begins by measuring my leg length.
This is the QYBT, or Quantified Y Balance Test. It's a dynamic balance test that involves you standing on this plate here, reaching in different directions. We measure how far you reach, and we also, using this sensor, measure the quality and the smoothness and the degree of control over your movement while you do the test. Let's take the arms out.
This show is a series of humiliation tasks, you know that, right?
Ah, yeah, but look, that's why they pay you the big bucks, isn't it? Step up, hands on hips. Your job is to touch down and then come back to the center. The full motion is a successful performance. Off you go. Okay.
It's hard.
Yeah. We do record these fails.
That's good to know,
Yeah.
Brian.
The aim of the test is to push your leg out as far as you can in 3 directions, creating a Y shape. This is repeated in a random order 3 times for each leg.
Okay, so how did I do?
In terms of your anterior reach, when you're reaching forwards, you're actually doing what I would expect most people to be doing.
Okay.
On the other directions, on both legs, your dynamic balance could do it a little bit of work.
Right. So can I improve my, what did you call it, my dynamic postural control?
The good news is you can.
Right.
Yeah. What we need to do is we need to challenge it. Give you increasing levels of challenge, and more repetitions, you'll gradually get better.
School sports coaches will track traumatic injuries, while students can privately log any pains or niggles they have via an app. They can also log other factors, such as the number of training sessions per week, their training load, and the intensity of the sessions. At the end of the year, this data will then be used, together with the results of the QY balance test, to see which factors are associated with a greater risk of injury. Chris Bleakley, who is leading the project in Northern Ireland, is keen to find out what impact musculoskeletal pain and injuries might have on younger players.
Pain and injury is complex, and there's a culture of secrecy when it comes to reporting pain and injury. It can create problems in later life, and we're really interested to see whether or not that has kind of filtered down from the professional game into the amateur game.
Peer pressure at that age is much higher, and that probably plays into it too.
Yeah, it does, particularly when it comes to making return to play decisions. So the pressure from teammates to get back, pressure from coaches, even parents sometimes, can all make that situation a little bit trickier and a little bit more challenging for the athlete. We'll get much more information on just how much training these kids are actually doing, and then possibly how that's impacting on the injury risk and their response to injury. Adolescence is a time of great change, and sport provides a really good level of consistency, or an anchor when everything else is changing. So we want to maximise the benefits and keep adolescents active and keep them involved in sport, whilst also minimising the risk of injury.
Our history is filled with epic feats of human endurance. Think of the legend of the soldier running from Marathon to Athens to deliver news of a victorious battle before dying from exhaustion. But it turns out that one of the most impressive acts of human exertion is one that has been happening throughout history: pregnancy. As many a mother will attest, carrying a developing baby is an endurance test in itself. And scientists have long suspected there may be an upper limit on just how much humans can exert themselves day in, day out. And just a few years ago, this ceiling was found through sports science. The race across America is one that challenges athletes to run from coast to coast, marathon after marathon, and provided the perfect opportunity to test this out. by measuring the athlete's base metabolic rate, the amount of energy burned at rest, and by counting the calories the athletes burned when running marathons day after day, the scientists found an upper limit on how much energy can be expended over long periods of time. It's about 2.5 times your resting rate. Beyond that, the body is burning calories faster than it can absorb food. Amazingly, their findings matched pregnancy data, meaning growing a child for 40 weeks is as energy demanding on the body as many continuous days of marathon running or long-distance Arctic trekking. So the next time you see a pregnant woman get on the bus, please give up your seat. They're running a 9-month ultramarathon after all. Yet another reason to stand in awe of all Manaw.
Some of our greatest heroes are our sports stars, and some of our greatest memories are from watching the drama unfold on the pitch and seeing our heroes emerge victorious. What we rarely see, however, is what impact a lifetime of playing at your peak can have on your body. Hi, Emer. How's it going?
Emer Cassidy played goalkeeper on both her soccer and Gaelic football teams before suffering an ACL injury in her right knee.
It was a huge part of my life. I always see it as kind of coming into second to school or work or college or whichever I'm doing at the time. You know, to me, it's the next priority.
Football is life.
Football is life. Football is life.
Take me through your injury, if you don't mind, Emer. What happened?
As with most ACL injuries, it was a light training session in the middle of championship. I was standing in goal. I had a player coming in and I went to do a slight change of direction and I heard a pop. That was it.
You heard a pop?
Yeah, you can hear it. Yeah.
You watch these injuries happen on TV and you think, oh, that's awful for that player because it's their whole career. But actually, it has a phenomenal effect on someone's life, even if it's just something they do as a hobby or for exercise.
Yeah, absolutely. I was 19 months out of sport. It was very difficult. You can get over the physical thing, you can get around it, but you know, you're standing on the sideline and all you want to do is be out there. My team won the Intermediate All-Ireland in the middle of it all, so I had to stand on the sideline for that.
Of course they did.
I know, yeah.
So part of your injury is this articular cartilage damage, which can last on beyond the recovery period. Is that something you're worried about?
For the time being, it's not something I'm particularly worried about. I still intend to play insofar as I can. In terms of the future, my hope is that by the time it comes to the stage where I'm in a position that I'm having long-term caught up and science will have come to some fix for it.
When articular cartilage is damaged, it degrades over time. This can result in osteoarthritis, a disease that affects more than 500 million people worldwide. Dr. Krishna Manda in Queen's University Belfast is hoping he can stop the damage before it gets to that stage.
Cartilage is a very specialized connective tissue that covers the bones in our joints. So the main function of this soft tissue is to provide a very smooth and frictionless surface for our joints to move freely. And this tissue is a very thin material, it's like 2 to 4 millimeter thick, and it survives these extreme mechanical conditions and protects our joints.
Articular cartilage works like a sponge full of water. If you compress it, the water will pour out, and once you release that pressure, the fluid is sucked back up.
Because of this fluid movement, those cells in the tissue gets the nutrients. That's how it survives. The mechanical loading is the lifeline for the soft tissue.
How do we treat damage to cartilage?
The current gold standard for treating osteoarthritis, that's a cartilage disease, or the cartilage damage, is to replace the whole joint. The other alternative is you can develop some sort of scaffold system in the lab and grow the tissue outside the body in the lab and implant it.
The project is aiming to develop a scaffold made of bioresorbable material using 3D bioprinting. A soft hydrogel material will be placed onto it that will have comparable mechanical properties to native tissue.
My role is to develop a computational model that will optimize what kind of structure we should use, what kind of material we should use, how those composite materials should be made of, how those reinforcement mechanisms, the fibers in this soft hydrogel, how it acts, and to find the properties that are similar to the native tissue. Once we are happy with all these optimized, best properties that work for a patient, we will create or fabricate the personalized, patient-specific implant. Biological implant exactly fits into his, I don't know, his or her, the joint, the damaged joint areas.
Once Krishna has designed the computational model of the scaffold, he sends the design to Professor Daniel Kelly in Trinity College Dublin.
Once we have the model, it's going to give us an optimal design for our biomaterial. So we then take that architecture, that design, and we input it into a 3D printing system like you see here. We will melt our polymer of interest and lay it down layer by layer. And then once we've done that, we run mechanical tests to see if the predictions of the model are correct. So for example, that could be a tensile test where we stretch the fiber-reinforced hydrogel and measure how stiff and how strong it is in tension. Or it could be a compression test where we could apply a compressive load that the material might experience once you put it into the body.
So part of the idea here is that this material can degrade. How do you make sure that it degrades at just the right amount of time?
The idea is that over time, the material we implant into the body gets replaced with new cartilage tissue. So we want our biomaterial to stay there for about 2 to 3 years to provide the mechanical function while the body regenerates the tissue itself.
I remember reading about this technology about 10 years ago and thinking it was the stuff of science fiction, but here we are now. How do you know it's going to work in the body, though? Because this is not in vivo, right? This is in vitro research.
Correct, yes. It's all lab-based research. So what we can do to try and understand whether this approach will work is that we can take cells from a patient and put those cells into our biomaterial and test to see if those cells will produce new cartilage tissue inside of our biomaterial. So while it doesn't fully predict what will happen in the body, it gives us some indication. Our goal is to regenerate the cartilage tissue and prevent the need for these more invasive hip and knee replacement procedures.